You're listening to Health Coach Conversations, a podcast where our conversations help health coaches all around the world to level up our businesses and to get more clients. What do you believe your purpose in life was or is?
We talk about purpose in the singular, like it's one thing that we're supposed to do. And at least in my life, it's been purposes plural. When I was younger, I played college basketball. When I got out of college, I really wanted to follow in my grandfather's footsteps and go into law enforcement. And I eventually did. I did it rather late in life. I was 37 years old, but I really felt that was my purpose. And now, since I've been battling cancer for the last 12 years, probably coming to the end of my life, my purpose has switched again to putting as much goodness, positivity, motivation, love back into the world as I possibly can. I think a lot of times we get hung up. It's like, I've got to find that thing. And I believe Viktor Frankl in Man's Search for Meaning also talked about that we're not here in the abstract. We all have a purpose or purposes to accomplish. And so we shouldn't just kind of muddle through life. I believe that. I believe we're here for a reason. And I think my purpose has changed over life. And I guess the last thing I'll say about this is this. I think a lot of times we hope or wish that our purpose would align with our job or our occupation. And if it does, that's great. But it doesn't have to. Your job could be over here. It's what you do to pay the bills. But your purpose is over here to write, to be a podcast host, to be an activist, whatever it ends up being. If they don't align, that's okay. You can still find and live your purpose without it being attached to your job.
And that's an interesting to note, is that your job doesn't have to be your purpose. You can live your purpose separate from that.
Exactly. People try to make it their job. And if you can, that's great. If you can monetize your purpose, outstanding. But you don't have to if you don't want to.
You've had a lot of different jobs over your career. How has your life experience prepared you to make the different career shifts? And isn't it funny how it does that?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at my resume, it does kind of look like a Super Bowl went off in a room. It's just kind of pounding all over the place. But if you understand the backstory, it makes a little more sense. And the backstory is this. My grandfather was a Chicago police officer from 1924 to 1954. And in 1933, he was actually shot in the line of duty with his own gun. It was not a serious injury. He was shot in the ankle. But my dad, who was an infant at the time, always remembered the stories that my grandmother told of that knock on the door of Mrs. Tucker, grab your son, come with us, your husband's been shot. So you can imagine when I expressed an interest in following in my grandfather's footsteps, my dad was absolutely not. You're going to college, you're going to major in business, you're going to get out, get a great job, get married, have 2.4 kids and live happily ever after. But that's the life my father wanted me to live. That's not the life I felt I was supposed to live. So when I graduated from college, I had really the first big major decision of my adult life. My father and my grandmother were both dying of cancer. And I could have said, hey, Dad, no, you're dying. Sorry, I'm going to go do my own thing. I'm going to go blaze my own trail. Or out of love and respect for you, I will do what you want me to do. So my first two jobs were in business. I was in the corporate headquarters of Wendy's. And then I went to work for the hospital that cared for my father and my grandmother. And then at 37 years old, I finally realized my dream of becoming a police officer. And Cathy, I'll be honest with you, that's one of the things I'm most proud about in my life is that I never let my dream die. I never let my purpose, and I'm a hospital administrator, I'm making good money, it's not a hard job, I'll just do that. I gave all that up to go back, be the bottom of the barrel and work nights and weekends because I felt it was what I was supposed to do. And we talked about purpose a minute ago. I really felt of all the things I've done in my life, that was my purpose.
If you hadn't done that, do you think you'd be sitting there regretting it?
Yeah, I honestly do. And the reason I feel that way is because I always knew it was going to happen. I was 37 years old, which is pretty old to be getting into that line of work. But I always knew it was going to happen. I just didn't know when it was going to happen. The books that I read, the TV shows that I watched, the movies that I took in, those were all things that usually the ones that made me that I was interested in, that I was happy about, were law enforcement related. So it was always there. It was always part of my life. It just wasn't something I was doing at that time. Eventually, it got to the point where, yeah, I have this opportunity and absolutely, I'm going to grab for that brass ring.
How did you end up as a hostage negotiator?
I was on the SWAT team. And SWAT, for those of your audience who don't understand SWAT, are usually broken down into two groups. There's a tactical team, and then there's a negotiating team. And the reason I wanted to be on SWAT is because SWAT is usually the best officers with the best training and the best equipment. And I've always wanted to be the best, part of the best in my life. And so when there was an opening as a negotiator, and I was well into my 40s when I did that, I had to go through what everybody else did. I had to do a 1.5 mile run, do so many sit-ups, so many push-ups, meet with the psychologist, take psychological exams, meet with the command staff, and then meet with the team. And it was an all or nothing with the team. If one person said, hey, I've worked with Terry before and he's hard to work with, or I don't get along with him, you didn't get on. So everybody, fortunately, on the team gave me the thumbs up. And we used to train. We had a psychologist that was attached to our team, and he would help us in training. You get on, you think you know what you're doing, and you realize what an idiot you are, that you have no idea what you're doing. And my first scenario was a hostage in a room with a hostage taker, and you're talking between the door. You don't see what's going on. And I spent probably 80% of the time talking to the hostage. And in the debrief, they're like, you realize we're trying to get the hostage taker to let the hostage go. So you need to talk to the hostage taker. And I'm like, yeah, I guess I got a lot to learn in this.
Most of our listeners are doctors and nurses and health coaches and mental health specialists. And as we go into these next few questions, if we could answer those in a way that maybe it could go towards helping them to know how to work with people that are going through the things that you've gone through. Can you describe your 12-year battle with cancer and what it's taught you?
2012, a girls' high school basketball coach in Texas, when I have a callus break open on the bottom of my left foot, and initially don't think much of it because as a coach, you're on your feet a lot. But after a few weeks of it not healing, I made an appointment and went to see a podiatrist, a foot doctor friend of mine. And he took an x-ray and he said, Terry, you have a cyst in there and I can cut it out. And he did. And he showed it to me. It was just a little gelatin sac with some white fat in it, no dark spots, no blood, nothing that gave either one of us concern. But fortunately or unfortunately, he sent it off to pathology to have it looked at. And then 2 weeks later, I get the call from him that basically turns my life upside down. And as I said, he was a friend of mine. And the more difficulty he was having explaining to me what was going on, the more frightened I was becoming. Until finally, he just laid it out for me. He said, Terry, I've been a doctor for 25 years, and I have never seen the form of cancer that you have. You have an incredibly rare form of melanoma. Most people think of melanoma as too much exposure to the sun, affects the melanin, the pigment in our skin. Mine has nothing to do with sun exposure. It's a rare form that appears on the bottom of the feet or the palms of the hands. And he said, because your cancer is so uncommon, you need to go to MD Anderson Cancer Center in Houston and be treated. And so I did. And I remember my oncologist telling me, you will more than likely be dead in 2 years. And I thought, okay, you've given me a death sentence. How can I turn that death sentence into a life sentence? What doctors do is they're like Vegas. They play the odds. It's like, okay, a man of your age and your health with your stage of cancer will more than likely live X number of years. But what doctors, medical professionals, what they don't know is they don't know you want to see your son graduate from high school. They don't know that you want to walk your daughter down the aisle. They don't know you want to play with your grandkids. That really is the whole mental part of controlling the body is something that I found has been just incredibly fascinating. I thought I knew it as an athlete, but I've learned it even more as a cancer patient. And my foot amputated in 2018. I had my leg amputated in the middle of the COVID pandemic, still have tumors in my lungs. And I remember after I had my leg amputated, I was with my oncologist and he was showing me my CAT scan. And Cathy, I don't know how to read a CAT scan, but you can look at it and be like, oh, that sure doesn't look like it belongs there. I had these big tumors in my lungs. I had fluid all around the pleural spaces. I was coughing up green, bloody phlegm. And I remember looking at him and saying, how was I alive? And I will never forget this till the day I died. He put his head down. He shook his head no. And then he looked up at me and he said, I have no idea, because you shouldn't have been. Which says to me, God's not done with me yet. I know medicine's a tremendous thing and it's helped me for 12 years now, 12 plus years. But what doctors don't get is that mental aspect. What they don't understand, they know the medicine, they know the science, but what they don't understand is the will, the drive to continue to live and move forward.
You think that hope fit in there anywhere?
Yeah, I absolutely do. There's this true story happened back in the 1950s with a professor at Johns Hopkins University who did an experiment with rats. And he took rats and he put them in a tank of water that was over their head. And he wanted to see how long the average rat could tread water. The average rat treaded water for about 15 minutes. And just as those rats were getting ready to sink and drown, he reached in, grabbed them, pulled them out, dried them off, and let them rest for a while. And they took the exact same rats and put them back in that exact same tank of water. And the second time around, on average, those rats treaded water for 60 hours. Now
Wow.
Think about that. The first time, 15 minutes. It's not like your business is going to fail or you're going to flunk a test. You're going to die. Your life is going to be over. And the second time around, 60 hours, which taught me two things. Number one, just like you said, the importance of hope in our lives. That maybe not today, maybe not this month, maybe not even a year from now. But if we know we're doing the right thing, if we know we're moving in the right direction, there's a decent chance that we'll get to where we want to be. And the second thing it's taught me is just how much more our physical bodies can handle. Don't get me wrong. I think we all have a breaking point. That breaking point is so much further down the road than we ever give ourselves credit for. We quit, we give up, we give in because our brains are telling us to. Our brains are saying, this is uncomfortable, this hurts, knock it off. And we do it and we stop because the brain's telling us. But if you think about a marathon runners talk about hitting that wall at some point during the race where, oh, I just don't think I can go on. I'm beat. I don't have enough energy to do that. But they find that if they can push through that, on the other side of that difficulty, on the other side of that adversity is more energy, more get up and go effort for them. Life is like that. Disease is like that. Push through that pain, push through that ugliness, find meaning in your misery. If you do, it's amazing how far you can go.
Do you feel like you've ever gotten to the point where you felt hopeless, and how did you come back from that?
A couple times. Because there was really no therapy, no treatment other than surgery. When I was diagnosed, my doctor put me on a drug called interferon. And so I took a weekly interferon injection. And I got really bad, 2 or 3 days of severe flu-like symptoms every week from those injections. And I took those injections for almost 5 years. So imagine having a bad case of the flu every week for 5 years. As my doctor said, this isn't a cure. We're just trying to kick the can down the road and buy you as much time. And there was a point, absolutely in there, where I was so sick of being sick that I literally prayed to die. Now, I never contemplated suicide or anything like that, but I really was like, okay, God, I kind of felt there were two camps. There was people who were living and people who were not dying. And I felt that I was in that not dying camp. Sometimes winning the day for me was literally being able to get out of bed and walk to the couch. That's how horrible I felt. And it was every single week for 5 years. So yeah, there was like, I can't do this. And then eventually the interferon got so toxic to my body that I ended up in the intensive care unit with a temperature, a body temperature of 108 degrees, which is usually not compatible with being alive. And I remember laying on that gurney and looking at my wife and literally with tears coming down my cheeks and saying, just let me go. Just let me out of this. Let me be done with this. And if in that moment, we have a very good friend who's a former Navy SEAL, and the SEALs talk about what they call their 40% rule, which says that if you're done, if you're at the end of your rope, if you can't go on, you're only at 40% of your maximum. And you still have another 60% left in reserve to give to yourself. And it was really at that moment where I was like, please let me die. Where it was like, no, you've got more to give to yourself. You've got more inside you. You think you're done because your brain's saying this hurts, it's uncomfortable, knock it off. But you have more. And that was a tremendous lesson for me to learn.
This is 12 years later, and they originally said 2 years.
Yeah, well, they keep lopping off body parts. I joke with my doctor, I'm like, you're piecemealing me to hell, one body part at a time. Here's a foot, here's a leg thing. But for the last 4 years now, I have been on almost 4 years, it'll be 4 years in November. I've been on a clinical trial drug that does nothing to the cancer per se, but the way cancer proliferates in the body is that it secretes an enzyme or a protein that basically hides itself from your immune system. And what this drug does is goes in and wipes out that protein or enzyme so that my own immune system, just like when we get a cold or a flu virus, can say, hey, this doesn't belong here. We need to attack it. So it's really my immune system. It's not a chemotherapy or something like that. I still have tumors in my lungs. They're still there, but they've been held at bay. They're not growing. They haven't gone anywhere else for almost the last 4 years now. The trial ended 2 years ago. It's just this medication continues to help me, so they keep me on it. Now, it's very labor intensive. I go to the hospital every week or every 3 weeks for an entire week. And I get the medication. I'm there for 5 or 6 hours. I get the medication. I have a really bad reaction to it. And then I get 2 weeks off to recover and then do it again. And I've been doing that for almost 4 years now.
With over 40 years of business experience and serving over 1,500 clients, the Health Coach Group knows what it takes to succeed. Let our expertise and resources guide you to a thriving wellness practice. Visit thehealthcoachgroup.com today.
Are there any lifestyle? Have you changed the way that you eat or the way that you move?
Yes. As a matter of fact, one of the diagnostic tools my doctor used to use was a PET scan. And basically, a PET scan works by injecting radioactive sugar into you, with the idea being that cancer cells have a higher metabolism and will pick up that sugar at a higher rate than the other tissues around them. And so that's what glows. That's what you see on a PET scan. I didn't think it took a rocket scientist to say, well, gee, maybe I shouldn't be eating as much sugar as I am. I've cut as much sugar. I'm not totally keto, but I've cut a lot of sugar. I don't eat breads. I don't eat desserts. I don't eat so much of our foods today have sugar in them. But I really try to do those things that I know don't help me. And every morning I eat a spoonful of this thing called Goop, and it has different flax and cinnamon and different things in it that help the immune system. I drink warm water with oregano and cayenne pepper in it. And I know you're like, oh my gosh, cayenne pepper.
I've had that before.
Yeah, exactly. And so, I do things health-wise for my body that I try to help it. And that I used to be an incredibly active person. I played college basketball. I was on the SWAT team in that. And now I have one leg and I'm in a wheelchair. So my exercise is absolutely changed. I do modified push-ups, core work, back work, things like that, just to try to help me. And I drink a lot of water. I don't drink alcohol. I don't drink soda or anything like that. Pretty much all I drink is water. So I do things that help me. People say, well, you should drink alkaline water. I'm like, okay. But when I did the research into alkaline water, it's like, you want me to spend $1,000 for an alkaline water machine when your body naturally regulates its own pH. So, putting a lot of alkaline in it isn't going to make it, may for a very short period of time make you more alkaline and less acidic, but pretty much the body's going to work that out so that your pH stays in a constant kind of middle of the road. So I'm like, well, that didn't make a lot of sense. People were like, you should do vitamin C therapy where you get injected with or IVs of vitamin C and things like that. And it's like, I researched that. Vitamin C is water soluble. So whatever your body doesn't need, you pee out, you get rid of and things like that. So there are a lot of things out there. And I guess I would recommend for people, if you want to do this stuff, that's fine. But just make sure you're doing something that's really going to help your body, and not something you're going to spend a lot of money on that honesty isn't really helping you.
I was just talking to a group of people earlier today, and it seems like you get people with the attitude of, well, I'm going to die anyway, so I may as well enjoy myself. If you had done that, then you would not still be here with us, right?
Yeah, and I've seen that. I've seen people that if they get cancer and they turn their entire life over to somebody with initials after their name who's wearing a white coat. And that's fine if that's what you feel you need to do. But I've always wanted my life to be based on the decisions that I made, not the ones I didn't or the ones that somebody else made for me. I am lucky I'm treated at a university hospital setting. So I have access to things like clinical trials and things like that. And so I can find things. For example, I read an article, 2 doctors in Portugal were experimenting with DHA, which is a fatty fish oil that's supposed to be good for your heart. And they found that it acted like a Trojan horse for cancer cells. So I immediately went to my oncology pharmacist and I said, hey, I want to start DHA. And she said, well, hang on a second, let's do a little research in that. Eventually, she comes back to me. She said, we don't want you to take DHA. You had a blood clot in your lung back in 2017. You're on a blood thinner now. DHA tends to thin your blood just in its natural cycle. So we don't want you to the point where you could potentially bleed out because of DHA. Now, that made sense to me. And that's kind of what I've always said with my doctors. Talk to me like I don't know what the heck I'm talking about.
Right.
Explain to me what you're trying to do, what this treatment, what are the expectations? What are you trying to get out of this? And if I can understand it, I'm very much willing to go along with you. I've also found in my life that, yes, I think Western medicine has its place. I think it's absolutely great. But I also think non-traditional medicine and things like that also should be looked at. So I'm not willing to do one over the other and throw the baby out with the bathwater. I want to try to get the best of both worlds and put those together to make me feel better and to make me live longer.
Is there any common denominator that's helped you through the trials in your life?
Yeah, I talk about what I call my 3 Fs. And absolutely, these have gotten me through my life. The first F is faith. I've seen people in my life when we try things, we want to do new things. And you start down the road to do that and you butt up against an impediment. Something gets in your way. You can't get over, around it, or through it. And so you quit. But we just don't quit. Now we got to blame somebody. Now we got to find that somebody to blame. And I got that same question when I was diagnosed. Well, who do you blame? You got this terribly rare form of cancer that's probably going to kill you. Who do you blame? I don't blame anybody because I got cancer. I've had all 88 genes that doctors know of or suspect cause every form of cancer that we know about tested. And I have no mutations in any of my genes, which kind of begs the question, why did I get cancer? And nobody's been able to answer that. So I don't spend a lot of time worrying about that. But it's funny when people find out you have a faith life, it's like, well, you must blame God. And I used to joke with them. I'm like, I don't think God got up on a Tuesday morning and said, hey, Terry Tucker, cancer today. I don't think that happened at all. But I do believe he's given me the faith, the courage to continue to move forward. So faith is one, family is another. It's pretty much my wife and daughter and I. And after I had my leg amputated, my doctor wanted to start me on chemo. And Cathy, I remember looking at him and saying, is it going to save my life? He said, nah, probably not, but it might buy you some more time. And I said, well, if that's going to be the case, I don't think I want to do it. I said, but I'll go home and I'll talk to my family about it. So I start talking, and it really did happen this way. Start talking, and my daughter, who was home on break in college, she was like, we need a family meeting. I'm like, family meeting? There's 3 of us. It's not like we got a board here or something like that. So we all sit around the kitchen table and individually talk about how we feel about me having chemo. And then when that's over, my daughter's like, all right, let's take a vote. How many people want dad to have chemotherapy? And my wife and daughter raised their hand like, wait a minute. Am I getting outvoted for something that I don't want to do? But I remembered when I was back in the police academy, our defensive tactics instructor used to have us bring a photograph of the people we loved the most to class. And as we were learning different techniques to defend ourselves, we were to look at that photograph because he reasoned you will fight harder for the people you love than you will fight for yourself. So I ended up taking chemo, not because I wanted to, but because I love my wife and daughter more than I love myself. And in hindsight, it was the right thing to do. It was the bridge that got me to the clinical trial drug. And then finally, friends. There were people that I was 100% convinced that if any tragedy befell me in my life, that they would be there for me, that they would not leave me. And when I was diagnosed, I was 51 years old. And there were several friends that are like, Terry, I can't deal with this. You're too young of a person to have your life cut short by this disease. And they kind of backed out of my life. And then there were people who I never thought would be there for me that haven't left me in the last 12 years. So faith, family, and friends really have gotten me through this very difficult time.
What are your 4 truths and how did you come up with them?
This is kind of a funny story, but it's true. I was on a podcast that was called My 3 Truths. And I figured, well, I better come up with my 3 truths.
At least 3, huh?
Yeah. And so it really kind of forced me to think about what was foundational in my life. What were these truths? And I came up with 3, and then I added a 4th one. I just felt the 4th one was more important. And I have them on a Post-it here in my office. So I constantly get reminded of them. They're just one sentence each. And the first one is, control your mind, or your mind is going to control you. The second one is, embrace the pain and difficulty that we all experience in life and use that pain and difficulty to make you a stronger and more resilient individual. The third one, and this is the one that I added, I look at more as a legacy type of truth. And it's this: what you leave behind is what you weave in the hearts of other people. And then the last one is pretty self-explanatory. It's as long as you don't quit, you can never be defeated. And I call those 4 truths the bedrock of my soul. They're just a good place to try to start to build a quality life off of.
You wrote a book, Sustainable Excellence, 10 Principles to Leading Your Uncommon and Extraordinary Life. How did you come to write that book?
Yeah, never wanted to write a book, never expected to write a book. There's kind of an old joke that says when we talk to God, it's called prayer. When God talks to us, it's called schizophrenia. So God has never talked to me and told me to write a book or anything like that. But I think what God has done, and this has happened a couple of times in my life, is that he put people in my path, and he put enough of those people that started making the same suggestion. You should write a book, you should write a book, you should write a book. And I think when that happens, I'm smart enough to sort of pay attention to that. So Sustainable Excellence was really born out of 2 conversations I had. One was with a former player that I had coached in high school who had moved to the area in Colorado with her fiance, where my wife and I live. And the 4 of us had dinner one night. And I remember saying to her after dinner that I was excited that she was living close and I could watch her find and live her purpose. And Cathy, she got real quiet for a while. And then she looked at me and she said, well, Coach, what do you think my purpose is? I said, I have absolutely no idea what your purpose is, but that's what your life should be about. Finding the reason or reasons you were put on the face of this earth, using your unique gifts and talents, and living that reason. So that was one conversation. And then I had a young man reach out to me on social media in college, and he said, what do you think are the most important things that I should learn, not to just be successful in my job or in business, but to be successful in life? And I didn't want to give him the get up early, work hard, help. I didn't want to give him sort of the cliches that we all know. So I spent some time and was taking some notes and eventually had these 10 thoughts, these 10 ideas, these 10 principles. And so I sent them to him. And then I stepped back and I was like, well, I got a life story that fits underneath that principle, or I know somebody whose life emulates this principle. So literally during the 4 to 5 month period where I was healing after I had my leg amputated, I sat down at the computer and I built stories, and they're real stories about real people underneath each of the 10 principles. And that's how Sustainable Excellence came to be.
What's next for you?
I'm writing a second book. Sustainable Excellence is a book that I felt is about success, about how people can be successful. Success is what we do for ourselves. And I always felt that I wanted to write a book that began with another word that started with the letter S, and that word was significance. Significance is what we do for other people. Don't get me wrong, I think you can be both. You can be successful and significant, but I've been in the process probably since last November of compiling a book now. Don't really have a title yet, but more about how we can be significant. How can we serve? How can we help other individuals? I've had so many people help me along my life, and certainly during the last 12 years, that I wanted to work on a book about that. That's what I'm spending most of my time in, doing podcasts with nice people like you.
What do you hope to accomplish by doing the podcasts with nice people like me?
One of the nurses that still takes care of me now for the tumors I have in my lungs used to be a hospice nurse. Mm-hmm. And for those of your audience who don't understand hospice, it's people who take care of others at the end of their life. And she gave me a book to read. And the book was called Imagine Heaven. And it's a book about people who have near-death experiences. And I learned a lot of things in the book. But one of the main things I learned was no matter who the person having the near-death experience saw, whether it was Jesus or a saint or an angel or a friend or a relative, whoever the person saw, almost everybody, not everybody, but almost everybody got asked one question: how do you treat my people? In other words, how do we treat each other? And 100 years from now, nobody's going to remember I was even here. But what I'd like to be remembered for are the connections, the relationships that I have with other people. I love going deep with people. I love trying to figure out, most of the books I read are either biographies or autobiographies. I love to understand what makes people tick, why they do the things that they do. It fascinates me in that. That's what I want. That's what I'm hoping to get. I'm hoping to make connections with other people, both for myself and for other people, to make connections with them.
Well, thank you so much for being here with us today. We will have to get both books. When will the new book come out?
I'm hoping to have it out by the end of the year. If not by the end of this year, then by first quarter of next year.
Well, congratulations on your work with that. I'm not going to come up with the right word for it, but you've had a lot of stamina, haven't you?
I have. I've been very lucky. But like I said, I've had so much help along this journey, could not do it by myself. And I'm very lucky, and I'll be lucky as long as God wants me to continue to do this kind of work. So thank you very much for having me on your show.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the show. If you liked what you heard, please give us a 5-star rating or review on iTunes.